Welcome to this episode of Talking Transformation, an Australian Transformation and Turnaround Association initiative. We hope you enjoy the varied conversations and experiences shared by our industry transformation and turnaround leaders. If you'd like to know more about AusTTA, you can visit our website at austtta.org. I'm the series host, Jackie O'Dowd.
Hello and welcome. In this episode, I'm talking with Harvey Farrington, who's going to share his view of transformation from a practitioner's view. So some things you may not know about Harvey. One, he holds 3 passports. I don't know anybody, you're a first that holds 3 passports. And he's worked in a number of locations around the world. That's probably why he needs those 3 passports. He's also a chartered accountant who's evolved into digital transformation program delivery. And he's worked with large accounting consulting firms, family PR advertising businesses, 2 startups, 1 successful, 1 not so successful, and an ASX listed telecommunications company, and also a global mining tech company. So lots of experience there. His last large project, I should say, delivered a digital solution across 20 entities globally in 4 languages. And currently, he's working for an Australian utility on a 2 to 3 year digital transformation program. So Harvey, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today, and welcome to Talking Transformation.
Thank you, Jackie. Pleasure to be here.
So as a transformation practitioner, what do you think are some of the ingredients that organisations and teams need to achieve successful outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. There's probably a common number of themes on the projects that have worked in programs over the years. The most important one is really support from the CEO and the board in particular, and making sure that trickles down to the project and the program teams. If you don't have their support, very hard to then get reinforcement when things start going off the rails, or you need a bit of support to pull things back in. So that would be the very first one. Probably another one is really a clear business strategy and vision at a corporate level that's quite well articulated and clear, and has also been communicated to everyone in the organisation. That's critical to then slot any project or program into that, as well as being able to have, your own program and project vision that's really clear to your own end users and delivery team as well. Those 2 things are critical before you even embark on any project or program. And then when you start getting into the actual delivery, having good people, but also having really clear roles and responsibilities. So the last large project that I was on, we formed a greenfields team, which was great, good and bad. We'd never worked together before. Over half the team had never worked in an agile environment before. And there was no clarity on role definitions. So the first thing we did was spend a lot of time team building, going through with the team themselves to understand who was going to do what. So we had clear boundaries and there were no duplications or overlapping functions and responsibilities. And then once we had that, we had the good foundation to then build some protocols of how to work together to deliver. And that all takes time. You can't just jump straight into a project and deliver straight away. Things like doing, team building exercises, getting to know each other, doing your psychological profiles and sharing that, and creating that environment of trust to know your strengths and weaknesses of all your different team members. So quite fun. You can turn it into a very fun exercise, and you also learn a lot about yourself and also about the people that you're working with. So there's some pretty critical ones. The best example of that is of setting that environment up might be the All Blacks. So they are a great example of a self-empowered, self-managing team that the coach will set the boundaries, the vision and the strategy, and then the team itself is obviously there to execute, and they will weed out underperforming members as well. If they're not performing, or help them coach and take them aside and actually mentor them to become the better players that they are. So I always use that as a great example of self-managed teams that are empowered to actually perform and continue performing in a high-performance environment.
Yeah.
So all of that leads to trust. You're trying to build up a trust, a safe environment to try new things, to fail, but fail fast, and to come back, readjust, regroup, and then try something slightly different. So the last project I was on as well, we had an amazing diversity. So we had 10 different nationalities, some with, from South America, some from Europe, and diversity was really interesting. So we had frustrating at times because it took a long time sometimes to do things, because you would have to listen to different people's opinions and take that on board, and then but it brought different thinking to the way that things could be delivered in a project. Very hard to do in reality, doesn't happen on all projects. People tend to naturally want to actually hire people like themselves, so you need to use some very clear unconscious bias and maybe also different people when you're actually hiring people, to try and deliberately go for people that don't think the same as you and aren't the same as you. And that generally leads to a much better productivity, quality, delivery, and also thinking out of the box as well for your solutions. So yeah, the diversity is really good on the human-centric design thinking. Showcases is another thing we've used a lot. So being able to actually use mini showcases, not complete parts of work, but showcases to actually really bring in the rest of the organisation or your customers on what you've done and celebrate those wins, make the delivery team really proud of what they're doing. It helps motivate them, helps drive them to better, higher quality outcomes as well. And it also makes your change activity a lot easier with everyone else in the organisation, rather than being able to say drop and run and you're on to the next project. And then the other one we used quite a lot was a really strong user feedback loop. So quite often we'll do a change, deliver something, and then move on to the next feature and forget about that product or that feature and never worry about it again, ignore the end user or the customer, and we're off to the next, next thing. So we've used quite recently a lot of, UX, UI tools to actually set up some really good feedback loops on how things have gone that we've already put in, and how we can tweak them further. And there are a number of software tools out there to help measure and monitor and actually report back on that. And it is actually also creates a good level of trust with your end user, because if they're then contributing something back, they know they can see how that goes through the loop and it might end up in the product. So they're more willing to then contribute more feedback again, and you just get better buy-in and stickiness for the product. The other one I'm a really big fan of is surveying. So NPS baseline surveying. Before you start a project, when things are hopefully, the pain point's quite raw, the end user community is crying out for a solution, and you get all this anecdotal one-off evidence of how bad it is, but sending out a really short, sharp survey with about 5 to 6 questions max, with an NPS baseline in a specific area. Brilliant to then house that and then compare it as you're going through the project or program, because that's the ultimate evidence of success. If that NPS line is moving, hard to argue with that when you go back to a board or an exco for the next round of funding or to continue improving the product. So yeah, the other one I'd throw in is change. Everyone forgets the change component. I know, Jackie, everybody
hates the change component.
Everyone hates the change. They don't want to do the change. They always underestimate how much time, effort and costs it takes. And it always takes the longest. If you look at people, process and technology, it's the people part that always gets undercooked. It's always the one that is left sometimes till last, done poorly, and not done regularly and often enough. So a lot of that is actually spending time talking to people one-on-one in different groups, managing stakeholders. If I look at my own time at the moment, I reckon 60 to 70% of my time is presentations, one-on-ones, coaching, mentoring, and actually just talking to people, putting them in touch almost connecting them like glue. And it takes time, energy and effort to do that, and a bit of a strategy and structure around that. So I would, communicate, repeat, and don't underestimate the change would be my final bit of advice.
Yeah. You've raised some really great things there. So I want to deep dive a little bit, if I can, into some of those. So you say having CEO support at the very beginning is really, really important. I wholeheartedly agree, because that's how resources get allocated in my world. What does good CEO support look like, other than coming out and putting out the PowerPoint slides and say we're doing this? What are some of the practical things that you look for, particularly in support from a CEO?
So you're spot on. The key to unlocking those resources is having a CEO that you can wheel in, that has a clear vision and strategy at a corporate level of where the company wants to go, that can also see and articulate on your behalf to your own stakeholders how that strategy and vision relates to your own program, because it all has to interrelate and interlock. And once they get that linkage, then as long as they've got faith in the delivery and the structure and everything, the resources then generally tend to flow quite a lot easier.
Yeah. I think when you get that support from the very top, then you do find there's a natural form of alignment. So we know what the strategy is, the structures, like you talked about the teams and how they're formed and play nicely or not so nicely together, the roadblocks that can be moved when you've got those support between those different teams, if there's power plays, the alignment of how you're doing things. I mean, a practitioner's role really is a bit like an orchestra conductor.
It is very much so.
It's just bringing all of the players together and saying, this is when you come in and this is when you be quiet.
Yeah, it is. It is connecting people in a way at a very simplistic level. And a lot of it is just seeing a gap or people not talking or that should be talking between two different areas and putting them in touch with each other. So it's not having the knowledge to actually fix it for them. It's actually just facilitating or conducting, as you said, those conversations so that delivery can be completed.
Yeah. So you talked about teams and self-managed teams. One of the things that I always find when I work with organisations is, and especially if they've got a federated structure, they've got teams everywhere all doing different things, they're all autonomous. Most of them have got their own P&Ls, their own priorities, all of those things. And then all of a sudden we say we're putting an optimization or transformation project or initiative throughout the business. How do you find the connection, how you connect those teams up quickly so they're all working to that same musical score that you've got to drive as the orchestra conductor?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So a lot of traditional companies are structured around command and control. To get access to resources and people, you've got to go up through lines of managers to gain access. Unfortunately, in the transformation world and the speed that we travel at, they really need to be more cross-matrix functional teams. So I guess the secret to that is trying to form your teams with representatives from different areas and then have the support of Exco and also your CEO to cut across those lines quite quickly, and including P&L as well. So the P&L is a classic one of where you butt it up against other projects or you're unable to unlock resources. So I guess having very strong support from the CEO and senior management to cut across that to get faster results is critical.
Yeah. So if we're looking at project funding and the resource allocation, what sort of role does the CFO have to play?
So the CFO obviously is really interested. We don't overspend the project or the program budget, and also generally they're the ones as well keeping you honest on the benefit realisation. So obviously most projects won't get up unless there's a business case, really they're in a space to help support on the financial business case preparation, help with some of the benefit realisation calculations as well. But generally, you'll find that they also have a very good knowledge of the company across operations as well as more than just finance, and has the ear of the CEO. So they need to be a very firm ally and a major supporter of your project or program. Otherwise, you're not going to get success.
Yeah. And they help with the growth mindset too, don't they? Because they can set the foundation for that growth mindset. If they say you've got the capital and this is the return that it needs to deliver over a period of time, all of these things all come together. So when you're working with teams that have got that transformation need, they've got a growth mindset, how do you keep that uppermost in everybody's mind in the day-to-day activities and keep the motivation levels up?
Well, it's a good point, because it's very topical in Western Australia and a lot of parts in Australia at the moment where we have a shortage of labour. So the growth mindset is almost a motivation tool and also a retention tool. So all the projects I've worked on, I've encouraged everyone to make sure they come with a growth mindset, but also learn to learn. So make time for delivery team members to go away, learn new skills. Yes, it's helping with their career development and their future employment, but it's also helping the immediate team to bring fresh new ideas. And so that may be new ideas of how to actually deliver stuff that we may not have thought about in the original, architecture of how we were going to deliver a project or program. So I've been surprised a number of times on a few projects where someone's come and said, look, here's a new piece of technology I learned on a course that I went on, last month. Why don't we, think about using that on this project? And so we've sat down, had a look at it, and we've gone, you know what? It's actually not a bad piece of technology. Let's use it. So gets back to that diversity again, and also definitely encouraging everyone to continually improve themselves helps the project and the program as well.
Yeah. And that it builds all of those individual courses while they're aimed at an individual. When they're brought back into the organisation and the structure allows it, it brings a whole new level of capability, like you said, that quite often people don't see. And I think it's a real untapped source of capability and competence within a business that just gets overlooked.
Well, it's hard to measure, isn't it? It's not listed on a balance sheet or a P&L, that intrinsic experience, new skills and everything, but it does actually make its way into, the quality of and also the sense of belonging, because they're motivating and educating everyone else on the team as well. So it has a flow-on effect.
And I think the good thing of thinking about that, like who's learned what, who's doing what, and sometimes it's got nothing to do with their actual role that they're in. It's something they've done outside of that role that, they're playing with, whether it's from gaming world or visualization world, whatever it is. But they're out there and they're playing things, and it's really opening it up within an organisation to say, well, what do we have and how do we get the best out of our people? So I think that diversity approach should look at what the capability is as well.
Definitely. And I think the other thing to throw in there as well is it's okay to fail. So if something doesn't come off, not having an environment of judgment and blame when something doesn't work, because then the team aren't going to then come forward with those new suggestions for new things the next time, because they don't want to be, blamed or judged going forward.
Yeah.
So as long as you fail fast, that's the only thing. There's a fine line there on, yes, it's okay to fail, but don't have a long, expensive fail. Know when to cut your losses and actually regroup and, repivot and try something else.
Yeah. Now, when we were talking through your bio, you'd been in two startups, one that was successful and one that wasn't successful. What do you think the difference was in the approach that the businesses have taken as to why one succeeded and one didn't?
Yeah, so the first startup was, I think, successful because they pivoted when they needed to on their business model. That was one, definitely. They were very clear in their vision and strategy, very driven, very passionate, high energy, strong management, and created a sense of belonging within their staff, and offered them a lot of educational opportunities, had a lot of diversity as well within nationalities and also race and colour. And there was a common goal that everyone aligned to and a sense of belonging. So that was quite successful, and then listed, and then ended up getting taken over a couple of times. The other one that was unsuccessful pivoted. They did pivot. They had strong management, but their business model was probably had very few barriers to entry. So they were able to be copycatted and surpassed by someone that had more cash. So once again, the soundness of your business, underlying business strategy and business model is just as critical as having good team and management to execute on it.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit into the people and process and information realms of transformation. Just recently, I did a project where one of the managing director of the organisation, which is a service organisation, said those with the most data are not the scapegoats, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. So how do you blend the data and information that the organisation's got, the processes that it's got, and its people capability to really deliver something that's transformative?
So all three components are really important. My personal view is the technology part's the easy part. A lot of IT guys would argue that that's not the case, but generally the process and the people components are the ones that need to work in tandem with the technology part. So I've seen a lot of organisations with drowning in data, so much data that they could be, actually analysing, using for predictive, value-added, type services, but they don't have the right processes in place and the right people structures as well to support that. So the process component and the framework around that of how to manage and own and control that data and transform it into value or information is really important, because the data sitting by itself and the technology systems is not going to do that by itself. And you generally need some good people driving and designing those processes to be able to actually create that value.
Yeah, you've got to have people who actually know what to do with that data too, and look for the gold nuggets within it. You can have terabytes of data, but it's all historical. It's all about telling the stories or getting the stories out of the data. What's it telling you? And
predicting, and then using that to predict what is going to happen in the future as well.
Yeah. Well, that's if you can predict. That's if you can predict. So there's, if you listen to what Margaret Heffernan has to say, she says prediction is almost impossible. But I think there are some solid grounds for forecasting. Yeah, I think there's some really good form in that. When it comes to technology, one of the things that I think is quite common is people run for the bright, shiny object. An organisation sees that another organisation is using a particular piece of technology or software and say, well, we need to have that. How do you, as a practitioner, how do you stop teams running off to go and get the bright, shiny object and really focus back on what is the growth mindset, what is the strategy, and what do we actually really need to do?
It's a very common problem because everyone wants the latest, brightest, shiniest thing. So a couple of things to manage that. One is a hybrid model. So allow a few of those. You need to allow a few new shiny things to keep everyone motivated, stimulated, and wanting to be involved in an exciting project or program, but also offsetting that with the boring process data, governance. So making sure that it's linked back to the original business case and strategy and vision, and it's a clear win, and it's going to have a real difference to the end users that you did the original business case for. So that's where I tend to rely a little bit more heavily on the governance structures and processes that were put in place to be able to say, yeah, we'd love to do that, but let's do maybe the baseline, get the base business case delivered and the benefits realised first, and then we can layer on some more of those exciting stuff in the future.
Yeah. Do you see that organisations push back when you want to start looking at and say modelling out or talking about process? Do they see that process modelling, process improvement doesn't work, or they've had failures with it in the past?
Yeah, not necessarily failures. I think a lot of people don't understand process, why you need to do it and why you need to do it properly. So you see a lot of organisations that don't document their business processes or even own them, but have business owners for them, let alone manage them. And you'll see a lot of people that there may be an effort to do that, but then it's not housed in anywhere and as far as the solution goes, and that person leaves, and then the process may break down. And then, consequently, the business suffers maybe in a certain area. So, yeah, making sure that you really pay attention to business process, and it's your IP. It's actually can be some of your unique IP. Like there's some business processes that are vanilla, common to every company or every industry, but there are also others that can be your competitive difference. So why wouldn't you be documenting that and treating it like a patent or IP as well, so that you can make yourself the most efficient, best customer sort of servicing company that you can be?
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of work around process. And one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating is the business intelligence that comes out of them. Simple things like, if we change this system, what activities and roles does it impact? Because most organisations don't know until they actually start it and think that's a change management issue rather than a planning and delivery issue. Like, you talk about teams and behaviours and diversity in teams. You can, by looking at your process, you can see where your diversity exists, where inclusion happens, where people are excluded, maybe from projects because they've had no experience on them before. And so they get left to the more mundane things rather than, let's just say, the more fun things. So I just find processes, especially in transformation, are core to everything the business does. And you're quite right. If you can mark out the differentiators, the things that make your business or your team or your activity different, then that's the whole area for growth.
Yeah, it definitely is. And as you said, a lot of people quite often don't know what their business processes are, especially in larger organisations where they go across functions and business units. So work might be being done in one area, but upstream and downstream, they're totally unaware of what they're breaking or changing and what impact that's actually going to have on the business. So the guiding principles on a lot of that process re-engineering stuff is trying to standardise, trying to automate, trying to obviously link that to decent systems with good data controls within the automation. And those principles hold pretty firm across, most process re-engineering work.
Yeah. So just to finish off, I've got one last question. You talked about governance and the importance of governance in a transformation project. What does good governance look like through a practitioner's lens?
Something that's going to keep the project and program honest, but not weigh them down too much. So there's a happy medium between compliance, regulation, and freedom to operate, move quickly, but with the right checks and balances in place. So coming from a chartered background, you always know why that needs to be done, but at the same time, you don't want to drown in too much paperwork and red tape, that you're spending too much time on that rather than creating and delivering on the actual solution.
Yeah, it's just having just the right amount of oversight, isn't it, really?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's been fascinating. So to finish up, do you have maybe a couple of words of wisdom for those that are new to transformation delivery and those that are wanting to get into the practitioner space, and some for those that have been at it for a long time?
So for the new people getting into it, I would say be bold, be daring. There's a number of roles in the transformation, game, everything from BAs to project managers, program managers, you name it. There's a lot of different roles there. There's a lot of work out there as well. There's a lot of skills to learn, but the best way of doing that is learning on the job and probably with some experienced practitioners and advisors that have actually done it before, that you can learn the trade and skill off them. To the experienced ones, I would say keep learning. That learn to learn. You're never too old, and it's good to keep afresh with all the young people coming through the profession as well, with some newer and fresher ideas. So embrace it. The diversity does work, and keep going.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you. And look, thanks so much for spending some time. I know it's late on late-ish on a Friday afternoon, and there's lots of things to do. And thanks for being part of AusTTA and the West Australian chapter and its community, and for sharing everything you shared with us. It's been great. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jackie. My pleasure. Thanks a lot.